My family comes from the southwestern area of the United States. We're not full-blooded Latino, but a lot of us are. The town in which my parents come from in New Mexico is prone to all sorts of weird sightings of shapes moving underneath the sand, lights in the skies, people being abducted, horned, upright walking beasts attacking people, people going missing, all sorts of crazy stuff that you would not believe normally. This is an area also full of Native American legends and lore. Even many of the native people in the area talk about the dangers of living out there, and not just from the increasingly rising temperatures in the desert or the venom of a rattlesnake, but the beings that are said to lurk underneath the sand. Anyway, it all dates back to the 1940s when my grandparents, before giving birth to my father, purchased land in the area and built a large house to live in, a little way outside of any real civilization. They owned and operated a bunch of cattle farming for years and years. They overdid it in the first few years and them running it, and were going through ranch helpers like crazy, I guess. People would come on board to help, but get spooked at all the stuff going on out there. Kids as young as 14 and 15 getting hired on to help. Some of them would flat out go missing, while others would report seeing strange tall beings approaching them through the pastures. Others talked about massive black beasts that would come out of the sand and come for them. Just crazy stuff, am I right? I can never get my grandfather to tell me too much about this stuff, because he was just a stubborn old man. May his soul rest in peace. My father was the one that opened up about it and told me everything I needed to know. He told me growing up that it was just a part of business as usual. Sometimes, if not most of the time, he felt rattlesnakes were the least of his worries, with all the bizarre sightings and happenings that were going on down there. Growing up in those conditions, it makes you a pretty tough individual. I'm not gonna lie. He's a strong man, enlisted in the army later on, and even served in Vietnam. Now, he runs a mechanic shop full-time and works on old cars. He's a very straight-to-the-point kind of person, and absolutely cannot stand it when you beat around the bush with something. He's the last person I'd ever expect to come up with a wild story filled with lies and fairy tales. So, when he began telling me about the things that were going on the land that his father and mother purchased and built on, was hair-raising, to say the least. He claims it was every day that they saw something go on. The things I mentioned to you at the beginning, the horned beasts, the creatures coming out of the sand, all of that. They would see this stuff go on non-stop. My father just grew so immune to the whole thing that he learned to live with it. They weren't losing cattle, and they weren't being hurt in any way, at least to an extent, and at least the family. As he told me, they were having ranch hands disappear left and right, while others would leave fleeing. That was when my father was just a little boy. They eventually had to hire out of town and even state to get some full-timers who were brave enough and paid enough to endure. There were a few ranch hands that reported being called out far into the desert night, like they were under some sort of spell or trance, and then wake up. Others reported being heavily watched during the day and night, so much so that they did not feel safe doing their job, like they had a sense of doom that continuously loomed over them. Much of all the crazy things that happened was what he believed was due to the natives and the magic they practiced on the land, long before they ever built the house and purchased the land. The land and all around the area was said to be cursed. They had apparently told his father that when he bought it, which by the way he got that huge segment of land for extremely cheap, even back in the 40s it was dirt cheap. My grandfather didn't have a lot of money, and he couldn't refuse the offer. With his leftover money, he decided to then build the house and the ranch that would accompany it. He would tell me all sorts of stuff that he saw growing up, and horrible things that went on. They did eventually lose some cattle over the course of the years, but not a lot. The cattle they did lose either vanished entirely, just like some of the ranch hands did, or were found with parts of their organs missing, or torn into pieces, looking like they fell into a wood chipper. At night, you would hear all sorts of howling, shuffling noises. Sometimes my dad would tell me about hearing a giant herd of bulls were full-on stampeding towards the house, only to look outside and not see a thing. He would see horned figures off in the distance, watching him at night, just before it got completely dark out. He witnessed large beasts of the earth, as he called them, climbing out of the sand as if below the sand lied a giant pit, finding dead rattlesnakes all over that appeared to die for no apparent reason. Many strange occurrences just like these constantly. That's not even counting all the strange things you would hear, smell, or see off in the distance. He's so casual when he talks about it now because he just grew up around it. He's told me these stories for years, and over time, he's eventually given me more and more details, especially with the natives' curse and whatnot. How the land was cursed before it was bought, and his take on all of it was there's a strong sense of dark native magic that looms over the entire area, not just the property. That is what he believes is solely responsible for everything. Even his dad grew pretty numb to all the sightings and weird happenings. Pretty emotionless, to say the least. For the first 5 to 10 years, his management of livestock and the ranch were extremely poor, so when things like dead animals would happen, or missing ranch hands, he wouldn't say anything to anybody. At first, many of the ranch hands he tried to bring on were vagabonds or people who didn't have much of anything. They weren't known throughout the community and were cheap hands to bring on board. Nobody really ever realized they were missing. And back in the 1940s, this kind of thing happened far more than you realize it did. Years back, I did get a chance to go back and visit grandfather's old land and house when it was currently vacant at the time. My father took me and warned me ahead of time that we're probably going to see, smell, or hear weird things, that it's important to stay grounded. Having not grown up in it, the things I would experience might disturb me, and I needed to be ready for it, psychologically. He didn't want me walking away from this experience traumatized at all. I told him I could handle anything, so we went. I hadn't been to my grandfather's house and ranch since I was little, so my memories were pretty vague. But, pulling up on the place, it was just like how I did remember it, even if it was only a little. It hadn't been updated much since the time it was built, other than the bare necessities. My grandfather was kind of a cheapskate. We arrived in the evening time, and the entire place just had this feeling that I can't quite capture into words. It was startling, like anything could happen at any given moment. You felt on edge, ready for something bad to happen, like you didn't want to sit still for very long. I didn't see anything crazy, but I would occasionally get a big waft of rotting flesh or raw sewage, or both. My dad would smell it too, and told me we shouldn't take too much time here. The fact we're here is known, and we need to not take long. Keep in mind this place had been vacant for years and years. Nobody had been around. There was absolutely no reason why we should have smelt either of those things. I asked him about the source of the rotting flesh and sewage that seemed to come and go, but like I said, there were no, understandably, reliable sources of either of them. We didn't hang out there too long before the feeling of being uncomfortable grew and grew, too much, till we decided it was best to leave this place far behind. Visiting that whole area just had a feeling to it, an unmistakable feeling, like you're not supposed to be there, like you do not belong. Many natives don't even inhabit that area, and they say it's not safe. I didn't notice this, but we were there, and my dad spent about 5 minutes looking around. Oh, I did not go with him when he found several dead rattlesnakes lying on the ground. No signs of how they died. That is very unusual, and it just acted as a reminder for all the weird things he grew up hardened to living out there at that place. As I said, the energy is just so strange, and I've never been somewhere and felt an energy quite like that. It's like it was so thick in the air, you can almost taste it with your mouth. It's not quite electricity. but there's just something sitting in the air. It's a feeling like you know something's coming, a bad storm. I was lucky, however. I didn't have to experience any of what my dad did growing up. His business was already booming, so we had it pretty well off, and I grew up in a different state because as my dad got older, he eventually moved far away and out of state, running his own auto shop on the East Coast, where business was booming for him. The house, ranch, and all there is there today was sold many years ago, long after our visit there. I don't know the family that owns it or operates it now, but I guarantee the sightings of all the strange things that happened when my father was growing up still exists and currently goes on. I feel sorry for anybody that goes into that area or that currently owns that whole operation. I wish them the best of luck and hope they don't deal with anything like my grandfather and father did. I can't help but feel doubtful about all of it. If that land is truly cursed, and even maybe some of the natives won't venture around there, then they will no doubt not last very long. Who knows what kind of true dark magic and rituals took place on the land years and years before my grandfather ever built on it.